All right. Hello, I am BMillzebub, of course, and welcome to my channel. In today's sex ed, we'll be discussing asexuality and answering questions about asexuality. Some of the questions are my own, others are questions that Luciano Gonzales and Atheistic Snails Journey get from time to time. And the rest, yeah, I guess some from the chat too, but the rest, other than the chat, are going to come from Twitter. And yeah, so because I'm a little self-obsessed, let's start with my questions after a real quick introduction from Luciano and Snail's Journey. So why don't you both introduce yourselves real quick?
Do you want to go first?
Well, sure. I'm Atheistic Snails. Sorry for the glitch a little bit ago. I forgot to mute the YouTube live chat. I have a Twitter account and I have a YouTube channel, and I'm a atheist, asexual, very boring person. Next.
Well, hi friends. I am Luciano Joshua Gonzalez Vega, also known as Luciano's Logic. I make videos talking about a range of things, but I have talked about asexuality. I am someone who is on the gray ace spectrum, which is a sort of very generic term that's used differently among different aces, but generally it refers to asexual people who are capable of experiencing sexual attraction. More specifically, I'm a demisexual, so I'm someone who is capable of experiencing sexual attraction, with the generic circumstances being that I experience a close emotional bond with someone. And I make videos on a whole bunch of stuff. If you want to check out my channel, definitely can.
You can actually find all the relevant links in the description box below, so there is no shortage of ability to find either of them. So let's get into the questions, right? So asexuality, I mean, you mentioned that there's a spectrum to it, but I don't know, maybe wondering why there is like a stereotype that says that asexual people feel no sexual attraction or sexual arousal, period, end of discussion. Do you know why that could be?
Probably just because people tend to engage in black and white thinking. It's probably less about people trying to badly stereotype and more about lack of information. We really haven't studied asexuality very much, and the term isn't out there. Luciano, you probably found the information when you first started looking for stuff very easily, but I'm in my late 30s, early 40s, and when I started looking for this information in my 20s, let's just say it was very traumatic because there wasn't any information out there. I didn't run across the word asexuality until I was 29 or 30. And then I found the Asexuality Awareness Network. And I spent the weekend sobbing because there were other people out there like me who didn't experience any of this stuff. I didn't know I wasn't completely fucking abnormal until I was almost 30. So
I had
10 years make a big difference.
I also had a very traumatic entrance into asexuality, or at the very least into using the term to describe myself, because I was dating someone who is not queer in any particular way. I was dating someone who was just a straight lady, and she is very nice. She's still a friend of mine, but she and I had a very tough time understanding asexuality. And I had always known that I was asexual, but I came from a moderate political but conservative social background, like many Hispanics do. And my family wasn't, and still kind of isn't, super great when it comes to accepting asexuality. I generally don't talk that much about asexuality in front of my family because they had a tougher time accepting that than they did my atheism, which is surprising to a lot of people because I'm Hispanic. But at the same time, it makes a lot of sense because Hispanic people can be very accepting of other religions, but they have a tougher time being accepting of other sexualities.
Yeah. So my family is primarily Catholic. I'm obviously an ex-Catholic. And I don't talk about my sexuality with my family, although my mother knows, because my father was trying to set me up with everybody and his brother. And I had to put my foot down to my mom and go, if he doesn't stop, I'm going to have an embarrassing conversation in front of our entire family with him to make him stop. And she apparently took him aside, and that was the end of that about 5 years ago. But my lack of children and marriage and stuff has been a problem for them.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm guessing, since you both have significant others, that asexuals are not necessarily aromantic.
You want to take this or me?
I'll take point on this one. So there are very different spectrums of sexuality and romance, and there are people who are capable of being romantically attracted to people of the opposite sex while being incapable of being sexually attracted to them. And that's not super common, but that's definitely a thing that exists, and it's something that a lot of people struggle with. I know that I am capable of being romantically attracted to people independent of their gender, but that is not the case for all asexuals, and I'm not going to speak for other people in the community.
Yeah. I suppose the best term would be demi-romantic, and I honestly didn't know that about myself till about 4 months ago. I considered myself aromantic, and I've, in the last 4 months, recently fallen into a relationship and freaking the crap out of myself when it first started, because it shifted my worldview a little bit. So I'm a demi-romantic asexual. It's the best I've got for it, or for now. Mm-hmm. And Alucard puts up with it quite well. All right.
Yeah. All right. All right. So, what would you say to anyone out there who would say that you're broken because of your asexuality?
I was broken, but not because I was asexual. I was broken because I didn't know what I was, and I was terrified. I spent 10 years running around the internet, desperately trying to find anything that would interest me, that would excite me, that would turn me on. I went down some blind alleys that no one should ever go down unless they're actually interested in stuff. Finding out about asexuality and figuring out that I wasn't alone was healing. So that's how I would answer that, but that's probably a little aggressive.
I feel like I've had a very interesting experience with sex and sexuality, because I have had sex. I'm capable of experiencing sexual attraction, and that's not the case for everyone in our community. But more than that, I've worked in sex-based industries. I have written like erotica and stuff, and I've sold it to people. And generally, I've only worked with like private clients, people who knew me, and people who like wanted to see what like erotic writing would look like. So for me, I'm not quite sex positive, but like for other people I am. And it's interesting whenever I hear people tell me that I'm broken. The other day I had my first conversation with like an asexual troll, not someone who is an asexual and a troll, but like someone who trolls people about asexuality. And their whole thing was trying to convince people that they were like medically broken and they needed medical help, and that would cure their asexuality. That was a really frustrating conversation, because it implies that all asexual people feel the same type of way about sex, and that's not true. Dear Mr. Atheist, or Mr. Atheist, had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with another sex worker who is asexual, and someone who is a sex worker in the more conventional sense, as opposed to people who like sell erotic goods or other types of services.
Yeah, like it's a spectrum. It's like there are people like me who have no sexual interest or desires at all. There's people who are a little bit more, all the way until you get to I don't know, regular sexuality and hypersexuality. It's just, and it makes sense that it's a spectrum if you think about it biologically speaking, because why wouldn't it be? Because it's all about chemicals and hormones and how your brain is wired. Anyway.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about a few of the different forms of asexual. And these three different definitions come from asexuality.org. You'll all be able to find the link in the description below. And if you go from, I'm trying to remember exactly, let me bring up the page. I'm sorry for this short delay here. But I want to tell you guys how to get how to get to this page correctly. I probably should have written it down.
It's the general FAQ way at the bottom.
Yeah, or you could stay at the top and click about sexuality and then go down to general FAQ. That'll work equally well. So yeah, you'll be able to go there to actually see these definitions, but you know, if you want to just listen along, that's just as good too. So we have the definition for asexual, which is someone who does not experience sexual attraction or an intrinsic desire to have sexual relationships. Then you have demisexual, which is someone who can only experience sexual attraction or desire after an emotional bond has been formed. And this is a different form than the choice to abstain from sex until certain criteria are met. And then there's gray asexual or gray sexual, and that's for someone who identifies with an area between sexuality and asexuality. For example, they may experience sexual attraction very rarely or under specific circumstances, or of an intensity so low that it's ignorable and not a necessity in relationships. So would you two like to sort of have a free-form talk on that real quick?
Sure.
Unless that covered it too well.
It's pretty... Go ahead.
Okay, so the one thing I'm going to say here is that I think it's fascinating that you looked up the definitions of both gray sexuality and demisexuality, because generally the way that I've seen it defined and the way that like I use it is that there is a sort of spectrum. And like we talked about this privately, we also mentioned this a little bit before. But generally on that spectrum, like gray sexuality is a very large area. And that large area is generally like somewhere on that large area is where demisexuality is.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how I've seen it used in the community, is the gray scale is the scale and you're somewhere on that scale. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Well, to be a little fair to me, I didn't actually go digging too far. It's just right there on asexuality.org.
No, I was I was looking at their FAQs. I think someone needs to help them clean it up a little bit. Because it is. If you're not talking with a lot of asexuals, I would find that very confusing too.
That's fair. All right. So moving on to some questions we've gotten from Twitter. Insects Are Cool asks, so that means they reproduce asexually, right? That's a joke. So I'm going to assume that only one of you is physically possible for reproduction. Can you do it asexually?
I mean, personally, I've reached like advanced asexuality on my character sheet, so I'm capable of reproducing by budding.
Wow.
I'm not like, I don't know anyone else. I don't know where anyone else has invested their points on their like sexuality tree, but I've invested them in being able to reproduce by budding. That's my feat. It's my perk.
Okay. Uh, gonna skip the next Twitter question for now because Shanna Vermillion asks, can you ask them ways that you can do more to help aces beyond talking? And the chat moved, so I lost it. There it is. Help aces beyond talking on social media platforms. I want to do more for my community.
I'm sorry, I'm probably not the person to ask that. I am significantly more active in the atheist community than I am in the asexual community. I haven't really been active in there for 10 years. I'm not even sure if Avon has anything. Do you know, Luciana?
So there are resources that exist that can help people. There's the Asexuality magazine, which is a publication that I've heard that they're trying to make it like a print publication, but right now it exists as a digital publication. Still a very handy resource, a really great thing for anyone who's interested in human sexuality and in studying human sexuality. When I have more free time, I'm probably going to try to write articles for them because I'm very interested in like human sexuality and in queerness in general. Another thing that I can think to do is just have conversations. And these conversations don't have to be like a one conversation and then boom, someone immediately knows and respects asexuals and asexuality. The thing is, it's just about talking to people and showing them that asexual people exist, that asexuality is perfectly natural, it's perfectly valid. It is more than a medical symptom, although it definitely can be for some people a medical symptom. And I'm not going to say that those people aren't asexuals. I'm not going to say that those people aren't valid, because they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I actually just realized I skipped my own last question. So, would you consider, or is sapiosexuality attraction to intelligence on the spectrum of asexuality?
So I would actually put sapiosexual as you could be an asexual sapiosexual, but that's more about what attracts you than how active your sexuality is. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, you are. I understand the point that you're saying, and I feel like I agree. The Avon wiki, which is not, is that asexuality.org? Is that what they changed their name to? Avon?
I think that may be the
See,
old. That's probably the old name. I think they call it
yeah,
asexual visibility and
an
education
education network.
network.
Yeah.
I think Avon is no, they have Avon on their main page still.
Oh, okay. Well, Avon is an organization that also writes and talks about different kinds of human sexuality. And they have a different model for sexual attraction, which is the model for sexual attraction that I use, where there are two different things. There's primary sexual attraction, which is when you are attracted to someone for things like their gender, for things like you can experience direct sexual attraction to people based off of their gender identity, their gender orientation, all that stuff. And then there's secondary sexual attraction, where you can be attracted to people based off of their personality, based off of their intelligence, based off of a desire you have to, say, have kids, or to use sex to achieve something. And that's a nefarious and dangerously worded thing to say. But generally, it's like the idea that you can be attracted to people sexually based off of their appearance and all of that. And you could also be attracted to people sexually because you want to start a family with them, or because you like sex even if you aren't sexually attracted to people in general, which is where I fall.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm gonna see if I can put it in the comments, because that way I feel like it'd make more sense. So give me a second. I don't know if I did that explanation. I don't know if I did that very well.
You did great.
Yep. All right. And Liz the Winter Ferret asks, do you still enjoy sensuality and physical closeness even if you don't want to have want to have sex? An example would be cuddling, kissing, spooning, or massage.
I personally find cuddling, snuggling, all of that very, very enjoyable. Something I look forward to doing with my partner. Kissing is plus or minus. I have we're doing a lot of negotiating because I have a lot of limits. So we negotiate yeses and nos on what works and what doesn't, and what works for him and what doesn't. If that makes sense to anybody else. Sorry, I'm trying to be not too super shy here.
So personally, I quite like physical contact and all of that. I also like sensuality and sensuous things. But also it is different for me because I am capable of experiencing sexual attraction, even if I experience far less of it than someone else who I guess is either heterosexual or homosexual or bisexual or pansexual would experience.
All right. This also comes from Liz the Winter Ferret. Actually, the next couple do. Have you ever wanted children, perhaps by adoption, if not the old-fashioned way?
I think it's a good question that Liz asked, but I don't think, at least for me, and maybe this is different for you, Luciana, I don't think the desire for kids has anything to do with your sexual orientation or sexual attraction to people. I personally don't have any children, and that's a choice because I did think about adopting when I was younger, because I decided my lifestyle wouldn't allow me to be the kind of mother I wanted to be. So I am a doting aunt to my niece and nephew instead.
So I do want children. I originally wanted children by adoption, although that had nothing to do with asexuality. I lived in Latin America and I wanted to adopt children from Latin America. But lately, and I think it's partially because of the relationship that I'm in, but also this has been a sort of shift that's been going on for a while now in my mind. I have been wanting at least one child biologically. Although Atheist Snails absolutely right, that has nothing to do with, and we're not saying that this was asked because of this, although this is a common question for individual asexual folks. This does have nothing to do with sexual attraction. I know people who are same-sex attracted who want to have a biological child, and for many of them that means like in vitro fertilization or another form of scientific, I guess, reproduction. But there are also people who are unopposed to the idea of just creating a child in the old-fashioned way, even if they're same-sex attracted.
All right. And the last question from Liz. We've actually kind of been over it. Wants to know, is there a difference between asexual and aromantic? And if there is, and I'm pretty sure you each think there is, how would you describe the difference?
Asexuality is limited or not being sexually attracted to someone. Aromantic would be those people who don't have a romance towards people. I know at least one person who's an aromantic sexual. So they enjoy sex, seek out sexual relationships, have no interest in romance at all.
That's also what I've seen. I suppose another one of the differences, I made jokes about aromantic, not aromantic people, but I made jokes about the distinction between romantic and sexual attraction when I came out on YouTube, which was actually one of the first places I came out on. I made a video last year. It was a very dumb video, but I really liked it, where I made a joke about someone being attracted to a fictional character sexually, but not wanting to date that person. And I guess that's like the biggest difference functionally. Although if we're talking about this like at the macro scale, then the difference is if you're asexual, you don't experience, or you experience very limited sexual attraction. And if you're aromantic, you either have no desire to be in a romantic relationship or you have extremely little desire to be in a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
All right. And moving on to a different person, Moto wants to know if sex disgusts asexuals or just doesn't interest them.
I'm not interested in it at all. Luciano does have, sounds like you have some interest. It's a scale. It's all a scale. I assume there are probably asexuals out there who are disgusted by sex. I have had sex. I find it, I suppose, boring is the best word. I don't know. Whatever everybody else gets out of it, I do not. And so I choose not to bother to engage with it. And I have a partner who puts up with that for different reasons.
There's a very wide spectrum among not just asexual people, but even among like allosexual people, which is the term that asexuals use to describe people who do experience sexual attraction, to try and talk about like how people feel about sex. The most common term, and I've generally only heard this in a sort of asexual context, is the concept of being sexually repulsed, which is generally the idea that sex does disgust someone. But the idea that this is uniquely something that is allosexual is not reflective of reality, because I know victims of sexual assault who are sexual people, but who have to unpack the sort of trauma that being sexually assaulted inflicted on them before they can have healthy feelings about sex and sexuality, which is not a super common thing, but it's something that happens to people, including allosexual people and asexual people.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to skip the next one because it's really similar to the one that I just asked. And Godless Jan wants to know how he can support them in society. So this was sort of asked earlier by Shanna, but I don't know. Maybe take another crack at it. You've had a few minutes to think of an answer.
My big answer would be just acknowledge that people like Luciano and I exist. Let people know that you know someone with asexuality. If you don't know the resources or don't know the answers, check with the asexual you know and see if you can refer to them. We make up, depending on whose study you believe, 0.5 to 2% of the population. So in a world with 6 billion people, or is it 7 now? There's a lot of us. It's 7. There's a lot of us out there. And the internet makes the world small.
I strongly agree with that. If you are someone in a position of power somewhere, then obviously there's more that you can do. But if you are just the average person, if you don't have a whole lot of time to take out of your day, then generally just know that we exist and treat us with respect. This doesn't mean that you have to try to become a champion for asexuality or anything. Although if you do, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate that, because we sure could use more of those. But like, it's understandable that people don't have all the time in the world to do research on this. As an asexual person myself, as someone who's on that spectrum, I don't know all the different types of gray sexuality. I know my type of gray sexuality, and I know a few other types, but that's it. And there's a very wide spectrum here. There's a lot of different conversations that need to be had. There's different things, like different cultural contexts to take into account. It's a complex thing, and it's okay to not know everything. But if you really want to help out asexuals, you should be willing to help us get like a platform. If you have like a show like Bub does, then be like, hey, I would love to talk to an asexual person about asexuality, a demisexual person about demisexuality, all that kind of stuff. But if you don't, then just know that we exist and that we deserve respect and acknowledgement.
Exactly. Yeah. Agree with you.
All right. Alrighty then. So let's start getting into a couple of topics that each of you gave me. It's just a phase.
Which one of us gave him that?
I don't remember which one that you gave to me.
I think you might have given him both. I have answers for both, but
Okay.
Actually, no, I gave the medical issue one. At least I think I did.
I don't remember. So the gist of phase, I'm not a super, like I said, I'm not a super vocal asexual. It's on my Twitter handle, and I think it's on my YouTube page, but it isn't something I actively pursue. It's just part of who I am. But I have occasionally heard that. And my answer is sure, but it's been a phase for 26 years. That's a long time for a phase. And actually, there are people, because it's a scale and it's a spectrum, and you can slide up and down on that in a spectrum depending on what's going on in your life. There are people who are asexual for a while and then later don't identify that way, and that's okay too. People are people. As long as it's not interfering with your life, stop freaking caring, I suppose.
There's a lot of talk in the greater LGBT community about sexuality being on a scale, and people like experiencing different phases of their lives where they identify differently, where they identify as different types of sexualities. And I've noticed that as a general rule, asexual people are far better at accepting this consistently than people in other parts of our LGBT community are. And obviously that's a generalization, which is unfair. But as a general rule, I've noticed that if people talk about like being asexual at one part of their lives and then being allosexual at another, those sorts of conversations can happen a lot more healthily in the asexual space than people who talk about like being gay or being bi and then being straight. And there are a lot of different factors for this. It's not really fair to try and use this to condemn all LGBT people, which is not what I'm doing. But if this idea is something that we want to accept within the greater queer community, then we do need to be better at consistently accepting it instead of just letting the asexual people be the ones who are just like, yeah, this is a thing that happens to people over the course of their lives.
Yeah. Well, yes, a huge ton of sexuality is about your biology, it's about your chemical hardwiring, but it's also environmental, it's also emotional, it's also medical, it's also, there is so much that we know that goes into just plain old everyday heterosexuality, and then you start pulling in all this other stuff. I don't know why we expect it to be simple. People are complicated, and I honestly think maybe like a quarter of people's problems with different sexualities would go away if people would just go, it's complicated. How are you feeling today?
All right, so I'm guessing that each of you would agree with the phase telling an ace person that their asexuality is just a phase is about or actually equal to saying it's just a phase to a homosexual person.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And the second thing that I have from either of you is that asexuality is a medical issue.
Luciano, you thought you put this out there? You can go ahead, or I can go ahead.
So both of us mentioned it earlier in our little messaging in the like little Twitter message space we use to coordinate this. But there are a whole bunch of different attitudes to take on asexuality being a medical issue. My personal stance is that there are people who are asexuals for medical reasons. I think that those people exist. I think that they're asexuals. I don't think that people should try to cure them or anything, which is something that I've heard thrown around a lot, and it's something that I hate, because at most asexuality would be a symptom of something, not necessarily a medical condition itself. And even then, I think that that's like a worrying thing to try and say, because usually when people talk about asexuality being a medical issue, they are people who want to quote unquote fix or cure asexual people. And that's really disturbing because that's been used to justify sexual assault against LGBT people in general. There's this thing that a lot of queer people, especially queer historians, are aware of, that is known as corrective sexual assault. And it is sexual assault where the purpose is to try and convert someone from one sexuality to another. And it's absolutely horrifying. And that is the same sort of rhetoric that was used to justify that people are saying to asexual people now.
Yeah. I've been lucky. I haven't personally run across that particular behavior. I do recommend people who are identifying as asexual, but who are also, I'm trying to think the word I'm looking for here. If you have a low sex drive and it is wigging you out, if it's bothering you, if you're thinking about it all the time, if it's a concern for you, find a good, safe doctor to talk to, because there are medical conditions that can cause low sex drive, like hypothyroidism or certain medications. But most of the asexuals I know, and this is, again, just me, who find the tag asexuality, our reaction to it personally is like what I said, what Shannon in the chat said. The relief of finding out that this is something that you are tends to be way overwhelming, and you tend to calm down and relax into the label. It doesn't tend to terrify and stress you out, other than environmental pressures from community, if that makes sense. Because there are a few medical conditions, and I had myself tested for them just to make sure, but not everybody should do that if you don't want to. Am I making sense, Luciano?
Yeah. And also, not everyone has like the resources to do that, even among the people who want to. For the people who want to, for the people, okay, so like for a while, being homosexual was considered a mental disorder. And I know it's not anymore, but there was a period between now and when it was first said to be a mental disorder, where it was still said to be a mental disorder if it was stressing people out and giving them like symptoms of depression. Mm-hmm. And it's really important that people realize that the way sexual people are treated can contribute to the early onset of other different and far more dangerous medical conditions, including mental health conditions. I know people who are asexual who've committed suicide or who have tried to commit suicide because they were bullied because of their lack of sexuality. This is a real issue that we need to be willing to talk about, but it's not that we need to be willing to hate ourselves for it. It's that we need to be willing to confront the culture that hates us.
Absolutely agreed. And I'll be honest, again, so my experience with the wider asexuality community is a little out of date, but like when I found asexuality and I went there 10 years ago, and then I went to my doctor to get tested, I purposely didn't mention asexuality. I said, I have this, and this symptoms, none of which were sexual. Can I be tested for hypothyroidism, low, prolactin levels or something? I can't remember exactly what I all got tested for. And I did it sideways, which shouldn't have to happen. But if you are in a situation where you want to know and you don't want to be outed, there are tricks to go around to go, I am concerned about this condition. What can I be tested? Pick the other symptoms on the list and leave the libido out of it, which unfortunately shouldn't have to happen, but might have to. It's inappropriate talk there.
All right. Well, that's all the questions that we had written down. Is there anything else you want to discuss, like a more freeform sort of thing?
So I guess I'll mention very briefly that asexual people, like people who know Snail and I, wouldn't call us robots, and we're asexual people. But the depiction of asexuality online, especially in like fictional media, is often really frustratingly negative. In fact, like there are more characters now who are asexual, but a lot of them are very deeply concerning. One of the biggest examples I can think of is Sheldon Cooper from the Big.
Oh, so many.
Who are like a super negative. It's like a super robotic person, someone who potentially has like a communications disorder, because there are people who thought that There are people who thought that Sheldon had, like, I think it was Asperger's for a while, and then it was confirmed in the show that he doesn't. But like people thought that for a really long time, and he's an asexual character. He's canonically asexual, but he's not the only person now. I think that like one of the Sherlocks, one of the Sherlocks is like canonically asexual in the show, but that's also concerning for other reasons. I think that's something that needs to happen, is that there needs to be greater depictions of asexuality online and in fictional media.
Yeah. No, I would agree. There's a lot of the official stuff, the canonical stuff that you see is just odd. You can very clearly tell that the writers who are writing it have no actual contact with, or at least no knowing contact with someone with asexuality, because the people they're writing aren't real. I actually found some of the most well-written asexuals I've run across are either in well-written fan fiction, which there is some out there, not much, but there is some, and there's this can't think, I'd love to plug them, but there is a small writing website that does LGBTQ authorship stuff, and they have an asexual section, and most of the authors writing in there are asexual, and those stories are very good stories, and the characters just happen to also be asexual, which is wonderful.
All right.
I can't think of who it is.
Going along with the portrayal of asexuality in media, Snail, you probably know where I'm about to go, because we were talking about this when we were still figuring out, everything we would discuss. But the episode from House MD with the asexual couple.
Oh, have you seen that, Luciano?
I'm aware of it. I've never seen it myself, but I am aware of just how bad it was. Huge yikes.
Oh, I mean, don't get me wrong. I am a fan of House. I hate House because the medical stuff on it is crap. Don't take medical advice from a TV show, guys. But yeah, that asexual episode, that was terrible. They basically ended up, I think it was the guy ended up having a medical condition, so they cured him, and then the woman was like, well, as I remember, sex was pretty good. So she was basically either pretending to be asexual or was demisexual, and badly portrayed.
I remember the episode. She actually was sexual. She just really liked the guy, so she was faking asexuality. Yeah. It's been a couple of years since I've seen the show, but that stuck out. I remember House somehow outing her. But yeah. Yeah, they could definitely portray actually all LGBT characters better. They don't do a terribly good job from what I understand. My LGBT friends are usually complaining about poorly written characters, So what are some suggestions that you could give to writers to better write these characters?
So I think that's something that I want to say, is that there is, if someone really wants to write an asexual character, they can do what Cassandra Clare did in the Mortal Instruments series, which is problematic for a huge number of reasons. But Cassandra Clare's The Mortal Instruments series has a character who's just asexual. He's a vampire who was always asexual, but like Cassandra Clare is asked she's asked on Twitter, it's like, hey, is this character is kind of asexual, or like asexual. Like, was the character always like this, or was it being turned into a vampire that did it? And Cassandra Clare's is like, no, the character's just always been like that. And that sort of representation is really important, because ultimately for so many people, especially asexuals, there are a lot of asexuals for whom being asexual is just a fact for us. There are a lot of people in our community who don't even have, like, they don't know the word asexual because they just don't care, and they've never really cared about sex. And that sort of representation really matters, even if there is also a space and a need for dynamic representation that shows off a character where a character's story arc is focused on their asexuality. Both are important.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
All right. I mean, I think that character's particularly interesting because my understanding of, I hate that I'm going to say it like this, but vampire lore is that they're inherently sexual creatures. Like it dials their sexuality up to 11. So like just the concept of an asexual vampire, which is already incredibly more sexual than your average sexual person, is baffling to me. But hashtag Heathen has a question for you. How do they deal with any abuse or negative interactions because of asexuality?
Do you want to take point on this one, Snail?
Sure. I will be honest, I haven't taken a ton of hits for that, mostly because, again, I'm not super active in the asexuality community. I'm much more active in the atheist community. Most of my negative interactions have been people who didn't understand what I was, asking inappropriately suggestive questions. And I'll be honest, I've been pretty lucky as a female to get less than most women I know out there. So, if that makes sense.
I actually have experienced, I'm not going to say like a significant amount of backlash for being LGBT, but like with me, a lot of it's being queer in general. It's not specifically aimed at asexuality. And like the more I'm active in asexual spaces, the more that changes, especially because even within asexual spaces, there's like levels of acceptance of different types of asexuals. And like there's this joke among some asexuals that there are asexuals who think that they're superior to allosexuals, and that definitely exists. Like that's definitely a very real thing. There are absolutely people who view their asexuality as like a sign that they're better than other people, which is hilarious to me. But like I think it's funny that most of the backlash I've experienced is for being LGBT in general, not being specifically asexual.
Yes, it is a little funny.
Oh. Oh, all right. I'm not really thinking of any questions. I'm not really seeing anything in the chat. So, I mean, unless either of you have anything more you want to talk about on the subject.
We did it, guys. No one will ever have any questions about asexuality ever again. It's common knowledge. We did it. Also, in response to Wonder Lady's question, I have used asexual dating sites. I was broken up for a period. There was a period I was single, and I wanted to meet other asexual people. After I broke up with my last super long-term relationship, after that relationship ended, I did date someone who is asexual, and this person and I, we still get along now, but we broke up, and that was the only asexual person I've ever dated. Not the only queer person, just the only asexual person.
I have not done, like I said, I thought I identified as both asexual and aromantic. So prior to about 4 months ago, I hadn't dated in 16 years. So I have not used any of those dating websites, much less any other dating website. So I'm afraid I have no experience. This whole relationship thing came out of left field. And it came, and like many demi-romantics and demisexuals, it came out of a pre-existing friendship that terrified me. So next.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm still not coming up with any more questions. I mean, Faye asked what your experiences were on ace dating sites and apps.
So I think it was fascinating for me because the ones I used, and later on, I'll probably write something. I'll probably mention in a tweet what websites I used. But the ones that I used, there were actually theistic asexual people. And I think that like in some theistic spaces, there's an acceptance of asexuality, especially within like Catholicism. Asexuality isn't that huge of a deal because priests are supposed to be celibate in most Catholic denominations right now. So like if you're a Catholic person and you're asexual, you're not going to be treated great, but you're definitely not going to experience the same sort of like heat that you would if you were like evangelical or Muslim. And I know both Muslim and ex-Muslim asexuals who are like not huge fans of both the fact that they're asexual and also like their experiences being asexual in those spaces.
That's, yeah, I can't imagine. And the Catholic thing, depending on where you are in the world, that's probably a vastly different experience with emotion and family push because particularly Catholics in super, what's the word I'm looking for? In the super religious sects of Catholicism, which my family fortunately wasn't, the push for family and children and stuff can be insanely intense. So
there are Christian factions like Quiverful. If you guys aren't familiar, okay, cool. Both of you, I can tell from Bub's reaction that both of you are familiar. I cannot possibly imagine, frankly, I can't even imagine being bisexual in that sort of community, much less asexual. Like, Jesus Christ, imagine being asexual and also not wanting kids, because those are separate things. But like, imagine being both of those things in a Quiverful family. That would be horrifying.
Oh, I think just being in a Quiverful family would be stressful and horrifying for the children just to begin with. But that's a whole nother like 5-hour discussion.
I actually dated, back when I was a Christian, I dated a Quiverful person who's still like, she's still a theist and she's still in the Quiverful movement.
Wow.
She doesn't have a husband, but like she was like, yeah, the minute I get a husband, I'm gonna start having kids. She was like ready for it.
Wow. Yeah.
That's just, they're oofy.
Yeah,
honestly, like the Quiverful movement is so non-existent in Latin America that I always forget that like over here there's like the Duger family and stuff. So like there are people that people can think of when someone says Quiverful, because like in Latin America, Quiverful people exist, but they're extremely rare, and it's generally like part of a Christian identity movement as opposed to like the specific set of Christian beliefs that the Quiverfuls focus on.
Yeah. I think the Quiverful isn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it started in the States, that particular movement, which is why it makes
I'm gonna check just to be sure, but I'm 90% certain that it did.
See, of course, now because of you, Luciano, I am never going to say the Duggar family name correctly. They are, from now on, the Dugars.
Wait, is that not how it's supposed to be said?
Nope, Duggars. But that's how I'm saying it from now on.
Do it just to disrespect them. I'm on their like Wikipedia page, and it looks like they actually have their roots in European Christian movements like the Anglicans, but I'm not seeing where it says that like the first Quiverful family showed up. Let me see. This might be a video. I feel like I'll probably make a video on them because I've always wanted to talk about the Quiverful movement. I've just never like sat down and actually like made a video about it, but I actually started on an article on Pathos talking about the Duger family. Yeah, those guys. I don't know why I'm trying to say their name right. They're dicks.
Yeah. I love hashtag Keelan's comment. Booger Doogers. That's awesome. One thing I just wanted to address is Purple Rhymes with Orms was talking about intellectually understanding asexuality and not emotionally getting it. One thing that might help everybody is, and I've seen this be hard for allosexuals and asexuals. Romance, love, and attraction are all different things. They are separate in your head, and we as a society and a species have tied sex and romance to the same thing. For a lot of asexuals, I'm taking a risk speaking for a lot of people here, think of them instead of a path that's crossed, think of them as train tracks, ties that are going separately from each other. So the romance part can be there, the cuddling, the emotion, the wanting to be with someone without that second railroad tie, without that sexual attraction. They're two completely separate things at least in my head. They're so far apart that they don't even come in the same spectrum. I actually have a hard time comprehending the thought of sex is part of romance. So I have the reverse problem. Is I have a hard time understanding why people tie them so tightly together, I suppose, if that's
something
helps.
Yeah, that's something that like kills a lot of relationships between allosexual and asexual people, because like there are allosexual people who are capable of being in sexless relationships, and there are asexual people who are capable of being in sexual relationships. This is admittedly a difficult thing for a lot of people to do, but one of the best things that people who are dating outside of their sexuality, or in the case of asexual people, outside of their lack of sexuality, really should be cognizant of like, hey, expressing romantic feelings and other kinds of attraction to people without using the language and acts of sex and sexuality. Yeah.
And one thing I would say, and this goes for all relationships, because I see a lot of relationships, and one of the things about being a slight outsider is you pay attention. Communicate. So anybody who knows Alucard knows he's an odd duck. Anybody who knows me knows I'm an odd duck. The thing that makes us work is we talk about everything. Like I mentioned earlier, we negotiate kisses. We literally, I'm not kidding here, and not everybody needs to do this. We have literally negotiated who's allowed to kiss where in what situations, so that we are both comfortable in getting what we need. We are talking long-term because he is a sexual person. We're talking about, how do we manage an open relationship? This is all things that are going to need to be negotiated in detail so that everybody is comfortable and everybody is getting what they need. We've talked, we negotiate cuddling, we negotiate this and that. Just talk to your partner about it. Just talk about it. Our stupid society is so puritanical. We've stopped talking about the basics, and just talking about the basics takes the stress off a lot. If that makes sense.
Yeah. All right.
Ended the conversation, didn't I?
I mean, I feel like that'd probably be a good note to like end on. Just talk to people.
All right. Well, anything else?
I want to say that I really appreciate Bub talking about this with people who are in the community. I know people who are strong advocates, who are intelligent advocates, who don't know people in the community, and they will try to talk about these things by themselves, which is fair, and it's definitely better than no representation. But I really appreciate that there are folks in our community who are taking the time to be like, hey, there are asexual folks all over the place and different types of asexual folks. Let's bring them on to our channel. So thank you for that, bub.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you both for coming on and, you know, giving the perspective of someone who's on the ace spectrum. I really appreciate it. Literally could not have done this without you. But yeah, all right. So before I turn off the stream, since you're both guests on my channel, I would like for each of you to shout out your channels. Give yourself a plug.
I'm on YouTube as Atheistic Snail Journey. I've got maybe 8 videos out there over the last year, and I'm currently working on a large couple of them, going after a homeopathic cancer cure guy that's pissed me off. And I'm on Twitter, and feel free to ask me questions. My DMs are open. I'm a little slow at replying, but I do get around to talking to people.
Hey friends, I am Luciano. I mentioned that before, but I run the channel as Luciano's Logic, and on Luciano's Logic, honestly, I just talk about whatever I want to talk about. I wanted to say that I had like a central focus before, but honestly, after looking at my last handful of videos, they're just so different. I'm working on videos responding to Marcus Rogers, who, if you've never heard of him before, is a Christian guy with a seriously large audience. Unfortunately, he is also very crazy. Like, he's a conspiracy theorist. He thinks that the gays are coming for the government.
Oh my gosh.
He thinks that Donald Trump is the fulfillment of like Christian prophecy. It's a wild time. I'm going to be uploading my first response to him in a couple of weeks, maybe next week. But right now I'm also in finals mode because I'm a graduate student. And hey, if you're thinking about going to graduate school, don't. It's like, I don't mean that sincerely, but boy, it is stressful. I have been working on one final for the last week, and I am almost done. It's due today, so as soon as this is over, I'm going to be going straight to finals mode to try and turn that in before like 11:30. I just got to edit it, but boy, oh my goodness, guys. But yeah, Luciano's Logic. You can subscribe to me if you haven't already. But I saw a lot of my friends in the chat. So yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah. Do either of you, by the way, have a Patreon or anything like that?
Do.
You do?
I have a Patreon. Yeah.
All right. I can't remember if you gave that to me to put in the description.
I did not. I don't.
Did not.
I have Patreons, and I want to offer like exclusive things on Patreon, but I haven't gotten around to making those things, so I don't promote it very much.
All right. Well, apparently Luciano does have a Patreon, and I'm gonna get that from you so I can put it in the description.
I'll send it to you as soon as we hop off the call.
All right, everybody. So that is gonna do that. I can't speak English today or ever.
I can never speak English, so I feel you.
That's gonna do it for this one. Thank you to my panelists, Luciano and Snail, once again for coming on and talking about asexuality. While you're here, definitely subscribe to me if you haven't already. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. And to find their information, Twitter, YouTube, and coming soon, Luciano's Patreon. Just go down to the description and give them a follow on each.
It's already in the comments, Wonder Lady.
That's very true. So I am going to right-click, open a new tab. And there I have it. So, but poorly kept secret, I also have a Patreon. Anything you can send my way to help will be greatly appreciated. And like Luciano, I too am working on different tiers and different rewards for everyone in my Patreon, which is nobody so far, but that's okay. But yeah, definitely subscribe to all three of us. Follow us on Twitter as well. And as I always like to say at the end of videos, take it easy, everyone, and I will see you all in the next one.